You are 24 years old. A letter arrives from a law firm you have never heard of. The return address is in a city where your grandmother lived. The envelope is heavier than it should be. You open it at your kitchen counter next to a half-finished cup of coffee and you read the first paragraph 3 times because the number does not feel like it is meant for you. It is meant for you. There is a phone number at the bottom. You call it. A woman named Patricia answers on the second ring and explains that you are a named beneficiary, that the trust became irrevocable at death, that there is a distribution scheduled, and that you will need to sign 4 forms before anything moves. You ask when the money arrives. She says it depends on what you are requesting and whether it falls within the permitted distribution categories. You did not know there were categories. Nobody told you there were categories. That is how it starts for most people. Not with a wire, with a form. With someone else's rules written before you were old enough to have an opinion about them. The ladder runs from $100,000 to $1 billion. The experience of climbing it is not what you imagined. Tier 1. The trust is worth $100,000. You're 18 or 21 or 25, depending on when the document says you are allowed to touch it. This is the education and early adult tier. It lives in UTMA or UGMA territory, or inside a simple trust with a single distribution trigger. The money is real, but it is conditional. Typical access rule: principal releases in tranches. 1/3 at 21, 1/3 at 25, 1/3 at 30, or all at once when you finish a degree. The trustee is usually a parent, an uncle, or a bank trust department, charging between 0.5 and 1.2% of assets annually. On $100,000, that is $500 to $1,200 a year in fees before your money does anything for you. If it is held inside a trust rather than transferred outright, the trust itself files a tax return. You get a K-1 in February. You bring it to a tax preparer who charges $220 and spends 11 minutes explaining what a K-1 is. You nod. You do not fully follow it. The income the trust earns, interest, dividends, capital gains, is either taxed to the trust at compressed brackets or passed through to you depending on whether distributions were made. What you feel at filing time is mild confusion and a low-grade sense that someone else designed a system and handed you the manual after the test already started. What changes in your life? Your housing choice at 22 is different. You take a job that pays less because the job is interesting. Because a safety net exists, you do not take the safe corporate track out of fear. You take the interesting one and tell yourself it is because you are brave. It is partly because you are brave. It is partly because $100,000 at the back of your mind makes risk feel lighter than it is. That is the trade-off at this tier. The money is small enough that it will not define your life. It is large enough that it quietly reshapes your decisions in ways you will not fully account for until later. Tier 2. The trust is worth $500,000 to $1 million. The family is first-generation millionaire territory. The trust is likely a revocable living trust that became irrevocable at the grantor's death, or an irrevocable trust set up during the grantor's lifetime to move assets out of the estate. Either way, you are now dealing with a document that is 40 to 60 pages long and that your parents or grandparents signed in a lawyer's office years ago, possibly with intentions that do not map cleanly onto your actual life. Typical structure: complex trust, non-grantor after death, typical annual income from a conservatively invested $500,000, $18,000 to $25,000. Typical annual legal and admin costs, $6,000 to $12,000. You do not always see those costs. They come out of the trust before distributions reach you. The trustee, if it is a corporate trustee, charges 1% of assets. That is $5,000 to $10,000 per year just to administer. If it is an individual trustee, a sibling or parent, it is free until it is not. Until the relationship frays at Thanksgiving over whether your request to pull $30,000 for a down payment qualifies as a permitted distribution under the health, education, maintenance, and support standard. That phrase, health, education, maintenance, and support, is a controlling language in a significant percentage of American trusts. It sounds generous. In practice, it means a trustee is sitting across from your life choices with a document in hand deciding whether your choices qualify. The first time you ask for a large distribution and are told no or not yet or we need more documentation, it is a specific kind of humiliation. It does not matter that the money is technically yours in some future-facing sense. Today it is not. Today someone else decides. At this tier, you start thinking about prenups. Not because you want to, because your attorney mentions the word and your family mentions the word, and suddenly a conversation you wanted to have privately with someone you love has external pressure on it. That tension is real, and it does not resolve cleanly. Tier 3. The trust is worth $5 million. Everything changes in tone. The structure is irrevocable, almost certainly. There are generation skipping transfer provisions, meaning the trust was designed to pass across multiple generations without triggering estate tax at each transfer. You do not need to fully understand GST mechanics to feel their effect. What you feel is that the money is further away than the number suggests. Annual income from $5 million at a 4% distribution rate is $200,000. But you may not receive $200,000. You may receive income only, which the trustee distributes and which you pay ordinary income tax on. Or the trust accumulates income and the trust pays tax at the highest bracket, 37%, on everything above $15,000 of retained income. What actually arrives in your account is a smaller number than the math implied. The trustee relationship is now the real story. You meet quarterly. There are reports. There are investment policy statements. There is a trust protector, sometimes a third party with the power to replace the trustee, a mechanism that sounds reassuring until you realize that person was also appointed by someone who is no longer alive. The costs at this tier are real but proportional. $40,000 to $80,000 per year in legal, accounting, and trustee fees on a $5 million trust is not nothing. It is also not fatal. What is harder to quantify is what the structure does to your identity. You are not poor. You are not free. You are something in between that does not have a clean name. You did not earn this. You did not choose it. The guilt arrives before the gratitude, or after, or they arrive simultaneously and you cannot tell which is real. The money is discretionary, meaning the trustee has discretion. Discretionary money, it turns out, is harder to metabolize than earned money. Earned money has a story. Discretionary money has a committee. Tier 4. The trust is worth $25 million. You did not build this. Neither did your parents, entirely. This is third generation money or a founder who sold a company and spent 18 months with estate attorneys before the ink dried. The structure is a dynasty trust. It was designed to run for decades, possibly longer, depending on the state. Generation skipping transfer planning is not a feature at this tier. It is the entire architecture. The trust was built to pass through you without triggering estate tax at your death and through your children without triggering it at theirs. You are not the destination. You are a waypoint. A professional corporate trustee administers it, not a family friend, not your uncle. A bank trust department or an independent trust company with a fiduciary obligation, a compliance team, and a fee schedule. Their annual fee is somewhere between 0.5 and 0.85% of assets. On $25 million, that is $125,000 to $212,000 per year, before legal, before tax preparation, before investment management. The full cost stack at this tier: trustee fees, outside legal counsel, CPA for the trust return, investment advisory fees if assets are managed separately, insurance and security review on any real property held inside the trust, land somewhere between $300,000 and $500,000 annually. That money leaves the trust before any distribution reaches you. You learn to think of it the way you think of property taxes: structural, non-negotiable, perpetually due. There is also a trust protector, a third party, often an attorney or a trusted advisor, with limited but meaningful powers. They can replace the trustee under defined circumstances. They can modify certain administrative provisions. They cannot rewrite the distribution standards. Those are locked. What you receive annually depends on the document. A typical income and principal standard at this tier might produce discretionary distributions of $400,000 to $700,000 per year. You pay income tax on what flows to you. The trust pays compressed bracket tax on what it retains. At this level, the planning conversation is constant. Your Tuesday involves a call with the trust officer to discuss a real estate purchase you want the trust to facilitate, and whether the structure allows it, and whether the GST exemption allocation would be affected, and whether your attorney and their attorney need to align before anything moves. You are not making a real estate decision. You are initiating a process. The golden handcuffs appear clearly here. The trust imposes guardrails. A distribution for a business venture may require documentation of a business plan, a review period, a formal request. A sibling who receives less because their share was structured differently begins to feel different at family dinners. The money is present in every room and spoken of in none of them. That is the particular texture of this tier. Tier 5, the trust is worth $100 million. The jurisdiction matters now. The trust almost certainly lives in Delaware or South Dakota. These states allow perpetual trusts, have favorable tax treatment for accumulated income, strong asset protection statutes, and no state income tax on trust income in certain configurations. The trust did not end up there by accident. It was placed there deliberately by attorneys who billed $400 to $700 an hour to make that happen. You were not in the room. You may not have been born yet. The structure is complex. Non-grantor characteristics dominate. There is likely an investment committee, sometimes a family member, sometimes a mix of family and outside advisors, overseeing the portfolio. There are distribution policies, written documents separate from the trust instrument itself, describing the philosophy behind distributions, what the trust is meant to support, what it is not. The language is careful: education, health, lifestyle maintenance consistent with the family's station. That phrase, consistent with the family station, is doing significant work. It means a trustee has a framework and you have a life, and the space between them is where negotiation lives. Annual distributions at this tier might run $1 to $3 million to a beneficiary, depending on the document and the trustee's judgment. The cost stack approaches $1 to $2 million annually across the full administration. You do not feel the cost stack the way someone at Tier 1 feels a $1,200 fee. You feel it abstractly, as a percentage, as a drag on compounding. What you feel concretely is the governance. There are meetings, there are formal reports, there are advisors whose names you know well and whose job is partly to manage the relationship between the trust and you. When your spending patterns shift, someone notices. When you want to make a gift to a cause that the trust would not consider a permitted distribution, you make it from what arrived in your account, not from what is still held. The distinction between your money and the trust's money at this tier is a real and daily distinction. You can feel rich and still be liquidity managed. That sentence is the entire experience. Tier 6. The trust is worth $1 billion or more. The word trust is no longer quite accurate. What exists is a private trust company, a legal entity formed for the sole purpose of serving as trustee to the family's holdings. It has officers and directors, some of whom are family members, some of whom are outside professionals. There is a family constitution, a formal multi-generational document describing values, governance rules, decision-making processes, and sometimes the conditions under which a family member can be removed from governance roles. The governance role itself can be a job, full-time, with a title. Annual distributions to a single beneficiary might be capped, not by inability to distribute, but by policy. 3 million, 5 million, whatever the document and committee determine is consistent with the family's philosophy of productive lives. The cost stack is institutional, $5 to $15 million annually across legal, administration, investment management, tax, compliance, security, and insurance on family assets. There is public scrutiny. Foundations attached to the structure carry the family name. Journalists know the name. Your name is in that name. What you receive is real. What you are is complicated. You are a beneficiary. That is a legal classification, and at this scale, it can become the primary fact about you if you let it. The risk is not poverty. The risk is that the structure becomes your identity before you build one of your own. Here's what to ask about any trust you might inherit, regardless of tier. Who controls distributions and what standard governs them? What triggers a distribution and what triggers a denial? What does administration actually cost, and where does that number appear in any reporting you receive? What happens when beneficiaries disagree, and who has the final word? What is the exit, if there is one? Comment below with the tier you would most want, and the first rule you would negotiate if you could sit down with the attorney before the document was signed, because the people who built these structures all had that conversation. You just were not in the room for it.